Hi, everybody. This is a hello and a beginning of our farewell program, but it's never farewell. It's what Odetta used to always say,
That show. It's this like live show that he does every Sunday. So,
see ya in a minute. So I send my thanks to Pamela, whom you see right by the San Francisco Bridge, which she's nice enough to lend to the program, as well as James Canary, who's been here every week, the keeper of the scroll, and the amazing Anthony Demarbiex, who somehow wades through all the catastrophes of high tech programming and makes this somehow happen every week, no matter what, since September. Of course, also of course, to Jack Kerouac, whose books are just so beautiful for all of us, and to whom I wrote the book that I'm been reading from, Offbeat Collaborate with Kerouac, and this is going to be the very last part. We also want to thank Mr. Norbert Wisdom, an amazing artist who's been here every week just doing his incredible spontaneous work, and our very, very special guest to end the series, the person without whom there would be no Kerouac Memorial Park, probably no awareness as there is that which he and Roger Brunel made people all over the world aware of, that Jack came from a French Canadian background in a city called Lowell, Massachusetts. And Paul was also one of the people who started that wonderful festival and is himself a distinguished poet and author, and wrote the number one book in most of our opinions of folks who were lucky enough to know Jack, Atop and Underwood, which is Jack's writings while he was still a young man in Lowell before he ever came to New York, showing what most of us suspected, that he would have been just as great a writer whether he ever came to New York or not. And we were lucky to know him, the person who pulled the engine for the train and whose works now inspire new generation not to copy him and or try to be a beatnik, which he wasn't, but rather to be themselves and to express their life. So we're going to, and then we have some very beautiful special guests that Pamela will introduce, a wonderful young professor at the University of Pennsylvania who was smart enough to give him tenure, and some other, and Hassan Medley, who made it possible for him to come on the program, and also someone reading in French Jack's early work. But we're going to begin where we left off. And again, I thank all of you and thank Pamela and Anthony for making it possible to do this, and hope that this will encourage you, first of all, to read Jack's books, whether you read mine or not. Secondly, to, when you see Jim Canary somewhere and he's on tour with the scroll, to come up and say hi and find out he's just as nice off camera as on camera. And also to be creative yourselves and to honor people in your community. So here we go, the home stretch of the book called Offbeat Collaborating with Kerouac. And I just want to poke my screen because I see something saying recently opened projects appear here. And I think that's the wrong one. It doesn't matter. January 3rd, 2007, I began a tour called Jack Kerouac Wrote Here, Crisscrossing America Chasing Cool. It was an accredited college course created by Dr. Audrey Springer, a young French Canadian sociologist who was a social scientist, had a better understanding of Jack's work. It's over on the table. I'm just getting my glasses, folks. A better understanding of Jack's works, thank you so much, than many of us who knew him did. And of course, one of the terrific things was her hard work as a dynamic young French Canadian socialist and social scientist. And she was a tireless worker who worked so hard and who has a distinguished, still has a distinguished career in many other areas outside of the arts, like many of today's young scholars, one of whom we will meet and hear from tonight. She appreciated Jack Kerouac for who he was and what he wrote. She saw that the cross-country tour honoring key places in Kerouac's life could have the same value for a group of students as it did for Kerouac himself, and that by learning to pay attention to everything and learn from everyone, you could remain a student long after you left college. She wanted students from all academic disciplines and social backgrounds to understand that education is a lifelong process and that we can all learn outside the classroom as well as in the academy, and that disciplined study can be a joyous experience as well as a challenge whose rewards are endless, and that Jack Kerouac and all artists whose work endures have always reflected the society and the times in which they lived, and thus affected future members of that same society to better understand where we came from, who we are now, and what we ourselves could become. Her boundless enthusiasm and zest for both teaching and learning new things herself made every student want to participate in every event that we did. And in jam-packed, hectic schedule that we had, it often reminded me of basic training in the Army. There was never a second off and little time to sleep. But we were all busy. It was challenging and as a result, memorable. We're the first ones to celebrate Jack's year of 2007, she said to me. Let's be certain we do it right. On January 3rd, we went to San Francisco and saw poet Lawrence Carradini and author Herb Gold, both then in their 80s, yet full of vim and vigor. We hiked through the whole city, up and down those steep hills with the indomitable Bill Morgan giving us his famed walking tour. We had a jazz poetry concert at the historic old coffee house at Trieste in North Beach, and we met as many of the surviving old-timers who knew Jack that I could round up. The students met Tish Waldman, Howard Hart's widow, and saw the church that Philip Lamantia attended. At a concert, the student read Jack's works themselves, accompanied by a trio I assembled, featuring the peerless drummer Omar Clay and singer-songwriters the Rowan brothers, and Neil Cassidy's son, musician, author, and raconteur, John Cassidy. From San Francisco, we went to Denver and did a marathon series of events at the Denver Public Library that included John Cassidy and his mother, author and painter Carolyn Cassidy, who did readings from her own book about her life with Neil and Jack for a standing room only crowd. We did a free concert at the Chapultepec Jazz Club. People were lined up around the block in the freezing weather hoping to attend the concert. When was the last time the Chapultepec was this crowded? A journalist asked Jerry, the longtime owner. In the 1960s, he responded. We gave 5 public free concerts to students and hundreds of others who attended what was a feeling of an open-hearted good time and spontaneity of Jack's era. Jack was packing them in everywhere. We took a morning hike to show the students the places in Denver that initiated Jack's travels with Neil and eventually became a vital part of the book, On the Road. In addition to the students, there were now several hundred people who came along to all our events, much to the surprise and delight of the Denver Public Library and Christy Martin, who somehow coordinated our frenzied events from the library. One of the urban hikes drew over 500 people. Josh Kupetz, a young professor who later was one of the editors for Kerouac's scroll for On the Road, along with Penny Vlagopoulos, volunteered to take 250 people in the crowd and form an advance party where we could co-host the lecture to avoid going hoarse while talking to the crowd. Somehow Christy Martin located a huge bullhorn so that the rest of the crowd could hear the crash course in the Arctic conditions of the Denver of the past and the Denver of now. After more hikes, concerts, seminars, and rap sessions, we thawed out, and after giving a matinee tribute to Hunter S. Thompson, with Hunter's widow Anita Thompson, Hunter's son Juan, and his grandson Will all participating, we raced to the station and took the train from Denver to Chicago and from Chicago to New York. This was a trip I always dreamed about taking, and my second daughter, Adira, who had come to Denver to join us, performed and helped Dr. Springer to organize the troops, who now had the train as their classroom. It couldn't have been a more appropriate location to study on the road. Looking out the windows of the train and seeing the remaining farms and villages and unspoiled woodlands rolling by made it clear why Jack wrote about a vanishing America that even in the late 1940s seemed to be slipping away. He and Neal Cassady both loved working on trains because they were a link to a time when the wide open spaces and small towns of all seemed to be part of an amazing mosaic that eased the loneliness of living in a big or small town. I told the students that the sound of the train whistle was the sweetest music to all of us brought up in the 30s. Whenever we were hearing that train whistle, it reminded us of the endless terrain that we called America. Even if we had never been far from home, that whistle made us know that the rest of America was out there and that someday we could discover it. As I rode the train from Denver to New York, it was the realization of a dream I had as a little boy in 1937, when I would lie awake at night at our farmhouse in Feasterville, Pennsylvania, and hear the Crusader, the express train from Philadelphia, go tearing by the nearby Somerton Springs Railroad Station on the way to New York City. I used to imagine that someday I would ride on that train and somehow play music in that huge city. Now in January of 2007, 70 years later, that's what I was doing. Riding on that train would take me there with a group of students who were studying Jack Kerouac and who were feeling the same excitement all of our generation always had and still has for travel and for experiencing new adventures. Riding from Denver to Chicago made all of us see that much of the America which Jack wrote about and which we thought had vanished was still here. The railroad tracks, unlike the superhighways, go through miles of undeveloped land, past old farms still being maintained, tiny towns, lakes and quarries, through forests and over mountains, and even past backyards of old homes, bungalows, and shacks whose yards are filled with discarded furniture, wrecked boats, horse trailers, campers, and homemade dog kennels. This could be America of the 1930s. Sometimes kids and their parents stood and waved as the train passed them by. Every night of the trip, I was awakened by that sweet sound of the train whistle as the train seemed as if it were going to lurch off the tracks, but it never did. The closer we got to New York, the more exciting it became for all of us. Seeing the students reading Kerouac as America rolled by outside, the window reinforced what it's like to be reading so much of Jack's work when you are alone in a quiet room. The energy of a huge country and all its people already filled all the pages of his books. And now these young people were reading his work as we sped across the country, about which he wrote so well. Now they knew what it was like for him and for all of us when we were on the road. When we arrived in New York, we were ready for the big city. We knew that America hadn't vanished at all. The train ride and Jack's books made us discover it all over again. Once you have heard that train whistle, you wait for it to call you again to take you to new places and revisit old ones. I think all of us who started out the year of 2007 to honor Jack and who rode on that train are waiting to ride again. The hour ended in Lowell, where Jack's life began. He was a perfect way to start the year. In between non-stop events during 2007, I managed to finish my new orchestral work, Symphonic Variations on a Song by Woody Guthrie, and my third book, Upbeat, 9 Lives of a Musical Cat. But almost every day, something of a Kerouac-related event took place. In the fall of 2007, I went to London twice for events there and performed with Carolyn Cassidy, still as vivacious as ever in her 80s. Everywhere I went, people told me how much Jack's work had affected their lives. During this banner year for Jack, I participated in several events in Lowell. One of them during the summer, both John Sampis and I received the key from the city of Lowell. And on Sunday afternoon, September 9th, 5 years after Sir James Galway premiered the concerto Giants of the Night with a movement dedicated to Jack, it was performed in Lowell, Massachusetts by the Orchestra of New England, conducted by K. George Roberts, to celebrate the 50th anniversary of On the Road's publication. The late Fenwick Smith, flutist with the Boston Symphony, played the solo part of the second movement. I closed my eyes and I could remember conversations with Jack as he told me about his walking down Salem Street as a little boy to Côté's Market in the French-Canadian section of Lowell, chowing down on a fresh meat pie called a tourtière, and hearing the two beautiful old French-Canadian songs En Canadien and À la Clairefontaine, being sung by people in the neighborhood as he walked home. 51 years after first hearing Jack sing them to me in New York City, when we were strolling late at night through those downtown streets, I was hearing those melodies again, now being played as part of a concerto I composed to honor him, along with the other two movements which were dedicated to Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, whose music Jack loved and with who he wrote about so compellingly. As the concerto was being played, I felt in some way I was bringing something of Jack back to Lowell. When K. George Roberts finished conducting the whole piece, I gave her a real hug of thanks for an exceptional performance and laughed as I told her that in keeping of the tradition of hyperactivity which Jack and I shared when we had our marathon hangouts together, and when he journeyed on his own endless travels, which he described in On the Road, that I had to rush off an emergency ride to the Boston airport to get to New York so that I would be able to play at 10 p.m. with Willie Nelson like I do every year for the annual Farm Aid Festival. This year, it was being held at Randall's Islands. Because of the Lowell concert being a matinee, I figured I would just get to Randall's Island in New York in time to play with Willie. Well, that's good, said Kay, and quite Kerouacian. You're still on the road, David, without a moment to savor your triumph. You're certainly not resting on your laurels. In fact, you're not resting at all. Don't worry. We'll all do the piece again, and next time we'll go out and celebrate afterwards. Kay was a real musician's musician, and I wanted to spend time with her after she conducted so beautifully, but I had to run off to a car in a drizzle, and I barely made the flight after a wild ride through the rain with Chuck and Consuela Sherpa driving me. As we drove, we planned some chamber music concerts we were going to do together in the future of Brown University. That's quite a full day you're having, said Consuela. Kerouac all afternoon and Willie Nelson all night. Well, Jack always believed that you should celebrate life and that now is the time. I think the important thing is that whatever we do, it has to seem effortless so that others have time to sit back and enjoy what we do, even if we have to knock ourselves out. Our job is to keep on doing it no matter what. Somehow got to Randall's Island just in time to play with Willie and his great band. And during a few minutes we had together on this bus just before we played, I spoke to him, his sister Bobby, his daughter Laura, and her daughter, all of whom loved Jack's work so much. Laura became inspired to write poetry and create songs in her own style after reading Jack's books. I hear all three of you young kids are making music on their own, too, said Lana, her mom. And Willie's two boys are out there playing with him when they're not in school. There's still a lot to be learned from being on the road. We're all still on it, I said. Dizzy Gillespie told me that's what God put him to do, to make that music with and for as many people as possible during your lifetime. Amen, said Willie. Let's go out now, David, and play some music for the farmers. 2.5 weeks after the Farm Aid concert, my new orchestral work, Symphonic Variations on a Song by Woody Guthrie, was premiered December 29, 2007 by the Symphony Silicon Valley, San Jose, California, conducted by Paul Polivnik. As I composed the piece, I used the approach that Jack and I had always talked of doing, combining the everyday treasures of what surrounds us and using these gems to create work of lasting beauty from those diamonds in the sidewalk. To give the piece the structure that would take the listener on the road with Woody as he wandered across the country, I created a set of individual variations that reflected what I felt Woody heard and saw during his years of cross-country travels until he settled down in Brooklyn in New York City. I first met Woody in 1956, the same year that I met Jack. Kerouac loved Woody's work, especially the book Bound for Glory, and sometimes would sing little ditties of his own, imitating Woody's Oklahoma twang. When Woody's daughter, Nora, asked me to write the piece, I knew I had to do it. Symphonic Variations on a Song by Woody Guthrie begins with a fanfare on the road, which introduces the theme itself to the listeners, and then leads them to the first variations modeled after a Cherokee stomp dance. This is followed by a depiction of an Okima, Oklahoma Sunday afternoon church service, a Pampa, Texas barn dance, a Mexican reverie, a slow dirge for the Dust Bowls, and a final series of New York City urban variations. There was, in those variations, there's a Caribbean march, a klezmer wedding celebration, a Middle Eastern bazaar, a Salvation Army band, a jazz variation, and an Afro-Cuban variation, all of which leads to a return to the opening fanfare for the road. Each variation had hints or statements of the theme superimposed in counterpoint to all the other music that I composed, all done in a classical way, not a pop schlock piece. The piece went off the way I dreamed it would, and the orchestra, the audience, and Andrew Bales, the manager of the orchestra, all liked it so much that I was asked to write a piano concerto for them. At the premiere, Neil Cassidy's kids, John and Jamie Cassidy, both came, as well as Al Hinkle, all of whom knew Jack and all of whom knew of the shared interest Jack and I had in combining the then with the now and the spontaneous with the formal. After the concert at the reception, we all had a special toast to Jack, followed by one for Woody and his daughter Nora and son Jody, as well as my daughter Alana, my sister Mariana, and her daughter Jessica, and my other two kids, Adira and Adam. Within a few weeks, several other orchestras had called to program the piece for their own concert series. 2 months later, it was made available to hear online at no expense as a part of a series by this fine orchestra, with permission of the union to showcase the artistry of the musicians captured in a live performance. Now anyone with a computer can hear the piece as it sounded on that very special night. I had no idea that the premiere would be such a success, but I was thrilled to have them debut it for personal reasons. The orchestra Silicon Valley plays in downtown San Jose, California, just a few miles from where I worked as a carpenter's helper and drove a truck during the summer of 1948, when I hitchhiked across the country to spend a few months with Julie, my high school sweetheart. Julie was an excellent French hornist, as well as a lovely young woman. I spent each day under the blazing sun, pounding nails and hauling floorboards in a pickup truck through the nearby Los Gatos and Palo Alto as part of my summer job. On my rare days off and on weekends, we used to go to North Beach, where Jack and so many of us later spent time. I also played French horn in various musical happenings, the Carmel Bach Festival, productions at Stanford University, and some jam sessions in the Bay Area. Even back then, in 1948, I dreamed someday of being able to compose in the classical arena and take all those other kinds of music into it. I was so attracted to it, somehow include them in what I hoped someday I could write. Now, here I was again, 59 years later, actually doing it. Many of us have our best dreams of our past that never become a reality. After decades of resistance, I'm now able to work as a guest conductor and soloist with different symphony orchestras, often presenting Jack's narrations with my orchestral accompaniment, performing pieces that I worked on way back with Jack, like my cantata You're in Our Land. I can also program the works of other contemporary composers and soloists who join with the orchestra to demonstrate the truly classical nature of what we now call world music. All these programs reach out to young people to build new audiences. And when I pick up an instrument and play it during a concert and pieces designed to open up the hearts and ears of the audience, all my years of experience of playing with anybody and everybody make it possible to do this and make it clear that it's all about the music. That's why at 77, that's the age when I wrote this book 13 years ago, I'm still collaborating with all kinds of artists, young and old. I wanted to share that open-hearted, open-ended experience bestowed upon me by our elders, of which Jack and all of us were the beneficiaries at a time when the possibilities seemed non-existent, but the level of achievement of those who tried was staggering. In keeping with the hopes of collaborating with another master of telling stories, I was working with author Frank McCourt, who I met in the beginning of the 1970s when I played at his brother Malachi's bar, The Bells of Hell, on 13th Street and 6th Avenue, 2 blocks from my old apartment in New York City, where Jack and I would take turns sleeping on either the couch or the floor. Frank loved Kerouac's work over the years, and we stayed in touch long after the Bells of Hell closed its doors. In 2000, Frank suggested we work on an ecumenical mass honoring 300 years of immigration in New York and America, with each portion of the mass celebrating a different immigrant culture. It was to be composed for narrator, chorus, and orchestra, just as my Year in Our Land was composed with Jack. Frank was a great reader and writer. I loved, and like Jack, he can make the words on paper sing when he speaks and make the reader hear the music from the writing itself. And I knew that anything he wrote would have the same combination of his own voice and storytelling of everyday events and his own life's adventures, written in a fashion that would also be literature of lasting value. We decided he should narrate the first performance and have me conduct it. Jack and I used to talk about collaborating on a piece similar to that, I told Frank. Well, we're not only going to talk about it, we'll do it, said Frank. You're the only composer who could write this with all the variation styles of music that you know. I'll somehow find the time myself. I'm collecting so many ideas. I need some quiet time to sort them all out. And like yourself, there's never any quiet time for me. Over the years, we got together whenever we could. In 2000 for my 70th birthday at the Paramount Theater in New York, 2003 at the Irish Embassy in London, when Frank's book Teacher Man was celebrated. I played music after he spoke, and he also, Frank and I participated in his brother Malachi McCourt's Green Party campaign for governor of New York. And in January 10th, 2008, Malachi, Frank, and I were all invited to perform at a gala event for the 30th anniversary of Symphony Space in New York City. I wish Malachi and I could be there for the big celebration of Kerouac's On the Road at the New York Public Library next week, said Frank as we walked backstage. Well, we're too busy, but we'll all get together. I hear Patti Smith has got to be there, too. She is, I said. We're going to do some kind of a duet together at the end of the night, and I'll finally get to meet James Irsay, who bought Jack's scroll and has it traveling the world for people to see. He's a good man, said Frank. I spent many years teaching kids about the value in life of reading and writing. By exhibiting that scroll to libraries, he's helping the whole country to think about becoming better educated. I've traveled all over this beautiful country since Angela's ashes took me around the world, and I've seen monuments and skyscrapers and hotels dedicated to generals and politicians and millionaires, but I've never seen a statue for a school teacher. Hear, hear, said Malachi. That man Irsay must be a hell of a fella. I'm glad you finally got to meet him. Tell him Frank's brother Malachi seconds the motion and applauds his generosity. Even though I was quite sad to see the Baltimore Colts pack up and move to Indianapolis. I told Frank and Malachi that back in 2001, I was invited by James Irsay, who had recently purchased the original scroll for On the Road, to fly to Indianapolis with Patti Smith in October to perform for an opening celebration before the scroll went on tour. When 9/11 occurred a few weeks before the event, Myra Borshoff called me and told me that it had to be canceled and rescheduled. We'll still all get together with Jim, you and Patty. We'll just have to wait until the right time, she said. When the scroll began its tour 3 years later, I went to Orlando to the Orange County Regional History Center and organized a whole program called On the Road with Jack Kerouac for the opening ceremonies January 15th, 2004. We honored Jack's presence in Orlando, where he was living when On the Road was published in September of 1957. We did readings with music from On the Road and played one of Jack's favorite compositions by Bach and selections of jazz classics, world music, and 3 of my own pieces that he liked the most. Myra Borshoff came down to Orlando for the celebration, and we all had a great time. Jim Irsay would still like to meet you and have an event with you and Patty someday, she said. We'll just have to wait until we find the right time. I'll look forward to that, Myra, I said, and whatever happens, it will be right on time. As it turned out, 4 years later and 2 days later, January 17th, 2008, that turned out to be the right time. That evening was called Beatific Soul, Jack Kerouac on the Road, and the entire evening was a delight. There was a sense of camaraderie and rejoicing that's so rare in formal surroundings, which often overwhelm everyone present. The New York Public Library's main entrance had been made over, thanks to Myra Borshoff, to resemble a 1930s Parisian cafe with tables, chairs, great food, waiters and waitresses dressed in black wearing berets, and montages of a young Jack Kerouac displayed all over the bandstand. Before the program began, everyone had a chance to spread out and spend an hour seeing an exhibit of Jack's early writings, paintings, sketches, and personal belongings that were tastefully displayed, with the centerpiece being the scroll itself, which lay stretched out as if you were seeing one of the highways that Jack took on his constant travels. As we sat up on the bandstand with our instruments just before we were to play, I watched everyone eating succulent, perfectly prepared filet mignon steak and drinking champagne. People were smiling, and it was obvious that they were all thrilled to be there. This was a really elegant occasion, far different than the ones Jack and I often attended during weekend bring-your-own-bottle party type gatherings, which would be described as hysteria in the big city or gross out time. We never cared, but it certainly was a far cry on this wonderful evening in New York City at the public library. The painters' lofts and the village get-togethers were always fun, no matter how raunchy they were. But when we strolled to most parties north of 14th Street, which in the late 50s was considered to be the dreaded adult world, we always looked for the beauty part, but sometimes you have to be an ordained saint or an archaeologist to find it. I remembered how Jack used to act at those parties, still dressed like the Lowell lumberjack, smiling and friendly as we pried our way through some stranger's apartment, squashing against other people like a bunch of sardines in a can, or like a 5 p.m. workers returning home during rush hour in the subway. The places where these get-togethers occurred were always packed with tension as thick as the cigar, cigarette, and reefer smoke that filled the jam-packed rooms. The swinging singles stared over their shoulders at whatever they were talking about, while asking about astrological signs and grilling one another about their jobs and how much money they made. On the rare occasions that there was food being served and you could find some place to sit down, it was a very different scene from this lovely dinner at the New York Public Library. Jack would have loved this, I said to myself. No one was shouting, spilling drinks on one another, having screaming arguments while food was falling out of their mouth, assaulting the waitresses, or hurling insults at the waiters before passing out at the table with their heads in their plates. This was a different kind of night. We even had a printed program. Each guest I helped to put together with Myra's Borshop's request, although we didn't follow it religiously. Jim Irsay wants this to be an evening for Jack, she said when we were planning the program a few weeks in advance. It will be, Myra. There'll be something on record for the guests to take home with them. And when people write about this event, the program will make it clear that all of us were there to honor Jack and all the treasures that he left us. We're having some good footprints here on Fifth Avenue for future cultural anthropologists to study. Oh, I wouldn't go quite that far, said Myra, but I think it will be a splendid night for everyone. It definitely was. Everybody who spoke was brief and to the point, and everything that was said about Jack and his work was too. There were no infomercials delivered during the entire evening. When we began to play, I really felt as if the then was definitely the now. This was not an offbeat experience in any way. It was right on the money. John Ventimiglia, known for his work in the TV show The Sopranos, had been reading Kerouac with me for several years in New York and all around the country. He played Kerouac in Joyce Johnson's play, Door Wide Open, adapted from her book. As John read at the New York Public Library and I played, I watched Joyce sitting there quietly next to her son Daniel at her table, as radiant as when we first met 50 years ago at the Cedar Bar when she was with Jack. After John finished his first reading, my daughter Adira, who played the role of the young Joyce Johnson in Door Wide Open, read a passage from the scroll, and then John concluded with as fine a reading as he ever gave of the last passages of the book. He had recently recorded the entire scroll for Penguin as a spoken word document that will surely become a classic. Artist Ed Adler talked about Jack in terms of his involvement in the visual arts, and then Robert Irsay gave us a warm, down-to-earth talk welcoming everyone, speaking about the scroll and what it meant to him, and then he introduced Patti Smith. Patti, just off the plane from Africa from the last leg of her latest tour, sat patiently by the side of the stage with Lenny Kaye, her outstanding musical collaborator, who missed part of the concert of his own that night just to be here to play for us with Patti. She came on stage and brought to the audience the new sensibility that her generation and those younger than her all share today in terms of their appreciation of what our generation did so long ago. Casually dressed and wearing a black ski hat, she moved the audience to tears as well as laughter with her riveting performance of her poetry and songs. She had the same fire as when I first met her January 1st, 1973, when we both appeared at the annual New Year's Day Marathon held at the New York Public Poetry Project at the St. Mark's Church on the Bowery. After she finished her last song, we did a duet. It was the first time we played together since Gregory Corso's funeral service at the Our Lady of Pompeii Church in Greenwich Village. That had taken place January 24th, 2001, almost exactly 7 years earlier. Now we were playing together again, but this time for Jack. Patti was a favorite of James Irsay, and I could see him beaming during the music that we played. As I played, I could feel everyone else in the room listening as carefully to Lee as I was, as if they were all musicians accompanying Jack too, and wanted to relish every word. The beauty of Jack's writing, enhanced by Lee's perfect interpretation, made us all realize that we had all come to the right place. We'll do it again in Indianapolis at the museum this summer, if you have the time, said Myra as I was packing up. I'll always have time for Jack, I said, and if I don't, I'll make some. I called up John Sampas, Jack's cousin or uncle, the next day. Actually, John Sampas was his brother-in-law because he married John's sister Stella. Before he drove back to Lowell, Jack has conquered New York City, I said. I always knew he would, said John. It was just a matter of time. It seemed now that Jack was what I dreamed of. Spontaneity and formality was not such an offbeat idea anymore. And I knew that I had to go home that night and take a few moments of what seemed to happen by themselves and use them in the piano concerto I was writing. It was a thrill to see so many people at such a stellar event, but I knew I had to get back to work. Like Jack, I knew that the solitary task of getting it down on paper was what I had to do. I'm now more than ever able to treasure those moments alone. I can compose in the delicious silence that in itself is a supreme element of all musical creation. And whenever I'm in the world, still on the road, in those places of silence composing, Dizzy Gillespie's words stay in my memory. He said, I'll do this forever. That's why God put me here, to play this music. Sometimes when I'm composing, I spend a whole day writing and rewriting just one measure of music, just to get it right. My orchestral scores are impeccable. I spend most of my commission money having the scores and parts copied and recopied, with every tiny nuance, tempo change, metronome marking, dynamic and phrase clearly indicated. But the music, the breathing, living, human, mystical, mysterious part comes naturally. That naturalness is what Jack and I strived for when we performed together. When we wrote alone, we created formal works, his books and my symphonies, inspired by the natural energy of those real-life experiences. When we performed together, we were celebrating the moment, dealing with the informal and daring to improvise like tightrope walkers. We wanted to create formal works built to last that retained that same energy. That's what we were all about. That was the basis of our friendship and our work together. When I go to high schools, colleges, or any place where there are young people today, they all know who Jack Kerouac is. None of them now tell me that he was the king of the beatniks. They tell me that they read his books. That was Jack's ultimate triumphs. His works speak for themselves. Until the very end, through all the pain and rejection, he continued to write. When I talked to him on the phone in those last sad months, at late night, early morning phone calls, he still spoke of work he had to do and dreams that he wished to fulfill. I feel blessed and lucky to still be here as I try every day to share in the joy of seeing my own dreams and music finally becoming true. I also try every day in some small way to share that gift of Jack's spirit, energy, and human kindness with everyone he met. Jack's work can enable future generations to look back on the second half of the 20th century and see the beauty part. When Jack and I used to talk about his desire to find his lost Canadian Indian heritage, I reminded him of the Navajo prayer of the 12th night, how the men and women prayed as they walked over the Trail of Beauty. I sang to him some of the old songs I had learned from Native American musicians. Jack and I both prayed in different languages, but the Trail of Beauty remained the same. Many of us walked and still walk that walk today. It is accessible to anyone and everyone, and it is endless. If you stand tall, as Jack did throughout his life, and walk that Trail of Beauty, you will surely meet him there someday. Thank you. That's the end of the book, and I hope the beginning for all of you who are listening to tell your friends to delve into their creativity, and maybe they can do something like the show that we tried to do and do a better one. And if so, that's cool with all of us, because the idea is to foster creativity in others. And certainly, as I mentioned in the beginning, we wouldn't have had this without the help of so many wonderful people. And for those of you who tuned in late, our special guest, who will be on in a moment, the amazing Paul Marion, is just an encyclopedia of knowledge about Jack Kerouac and Jack's heritage, since Paul and Roger Prunel were the two people of Franco-American heritage that really made all of us aware about that. And also his lifetime in Lowell, which in itself is such an extraordinary place and has such a wonderful down-home, human, warm, unsnobbish, giving, fabulous, fantastic, indescribable feeling. And the festival reflects that good old feeling that we think is gone, but which is still here, but doesn't hit the big-time media so much. But so what? It still is there, and a lot of other places are too. So we hope that he will make all of you who might come from a small community feel that where you are from is important, and people of distinction in your community also deserve to be honored as Jack was. And in that way, we can honor our own selves and everyone else that crosses our path. But enough of that. You've already heard that. I'd now like to introduce you to the woman who made this possible, and she can tell you what we're going to do for the program, and the other Jean-Christophe and all the fantastic people who are going to be on the program, and including James Canary, who'll be reading. And as you know, James is the person who was a conservator and now takes the scroll all around the world of On the Road, not with an army of guards with clubs and nasty-looking security guards, but just by himself in such a gracious way that people, instead of dropping cigarette butts on it, stand there in awe, as we all do, and sop up the good vibes of someone who created something in 3 weeks that helped all of us in America to be proud of ourselves and learn how to be better people. So please welcome, along with Anthony Demarbiex, who is too modest to appear on camera but does all the work, the other person who's made this whole impossible series become a reality, Pamela Dickerson.
Thank you, David. I'm feeling already that parting is such a sweet sorrow sensation. Such a blessing to be with you these last 6 months, and love you dearly. And everything you read today, culminating into the end, it was, to me, like holy, the end of Howl, and it just escalates into the most beautiful symphony of love and meaning, and you touched me deeply, so thank you. It's exciting to have Paul Marion here, and Jean-Christophe is going to come back. He was here last week. He's the translator. People are more equipped to speak on this than I am, and we're going to run some texts in a new way. And Hassan, good to see you. I'm not going to try to scroll right now. Last week I did that, and my whole setup flew down. You're actually perched on top of a big stack of Kerouac books, some of the Dharma, etc.
I am.
Yes, everyone is. So thank you for being here, and we welcome Paul Marion.
Could I just mention a generational thing? I think because Jean-Christophe is a professor at Penn, and David, if I'm not mistaken, your father and grandfather were professors at Penn also. Isn't that right?
Yeah, my father was a farmer, got his degree in agriculture, University of Pennsylvania, and after he and his brother, who became a merchant seaman and was my guide in so many things in the arts and life, decided to pursue that. My father, at an late age for that time, went to law school and did so well that he became an assistant professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and also ended up writing a textbook and still was a farmer. So when people say, how can you work 18 hours a day? I said, man, you should have seen my father. That's all he did.
Yeah.
And his father was a scholar, and also I think did something at Penn, but he was also a very hardworking, old-fashioned person.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't sure you knew about that connection, Jean-Christophe, but
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And I think University of Pennsylvania is lucky, and I wish my father and grandfather were alive to give him a big felicitation.
Thank you, David. It's very nice to even be in the aura of such a lineage.
See, we were brought up on the farm, and my father would come, the minute he would come home from work or teaching, he'd just get out there and work till midnight doing the farming. And on the weekends, that's all he did from dawn till dusk. And when people would come to visit, they'd say, "Can we help out?" And he'd say, "Please." And then they'd never come back because they'd be working. So all I remember with him was working. And I never realized that he'd written that law book and done all that other stuff till I got older and met his students. So I was brought up mostly with neighborhood farmers, and that turned out to be a blessing. And like yourself, he was someone that loved teaching and loved scholarship and loved hard work, and very, very fortunate.
Are we going to hear from Paul?
unmute Paul.
Okay, I thought they were controlling the mute at the headquarters. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Great to see people. Congratulations on this successful series. Really, remarkable that you were able to produce all these events. And I'm very glad that I was able to, get here before the curtain came down. So thanks again. I was asked to read something by Jack Kerouac, and then also to read something of my own that might relate, to the occasion. Because we had the 99th would have been birthday of Jack Kerouac on Friday, March 12th. I thought it would be interesting to choose a short piece from Atop and Underwood that related to the idea of birthday, but it's a kind of counterintuitive piece because it's not really about his actual birthday, but it's about an event that he recalls, a kind of coming to consciousness in February of 1929, just before he turned 7 years old. And the piece is called Sadness at Six. He would come back to this experience in another short piece of writing called My Sad Sunset Birth, which I don't think actually has been published. We looked at it for Atop and Underwood, but we chose this one instead. And then another mention of this event is in a letter that he wrote to Neil Cassidy in the, when was it? 1950s, I think. Yes, December 1950, he wrote to Neil Cassidy, and he described, this epiphany, kind of opening of his mind, opening of his soul, and so it was an experience that he felt was critical, to his development as a person. And I'll read it here. The day I was born, there was snow on the ground, and the light from the descending sun made the windows in Centerville glow with strange and lovely melancholia. Of course, Centerville was his birth neighborhood on the neighborhood side of the river in Lowell. I was 6 years old, walking home with my sled. Suddenly, I was born. I began to wonder, genuine, mature wondering. I was wondering about this. Why is everything sad now as I go home to my supper? Why? I was born, therefore, in 1929, about 7 months before the great stock market crash in Wall Street. In Centerville, I didn't hear a damn thing. And for all that, I was busy wondering anyway. I had no time to dawdle with worldly affairs. In the newspaper, I looked at the big headlines telling of the stock market crash, but I didn't care much, apparently, since today all I can remember today is Popeye and the Thimble Theater by Seager Company, 1929, King Features Syndicate, and so forth. Nothing about the stock market crash, only Popeye in the funny page. The day I was born, on my way to supper with my sled, hands feeling red hot with energy, myself steaming into the winter air from underneath the warm scarf, I stopped to look at all the sad windows of the houses. Why? Why, I asked myself, age 6. Pourquoi? I might have said, because I was French. At any rate, I wanted to know, and I couldn't quite make it out, and I still cannot make it out, which is in a nutshell the story of inward war raging inside me. Science versus poetry, Bazarov versus Woolf, and all that sort of thing. Tennysonian sentimentality versus the Gallup poll, or better, Shelley versus Eleanor Roosevelt. It's an astounding question and needs to be solved. I came very close to solving it the first day I was born. Since then, I've been getting further and further away from the answer. Until today, I'm ignorant. At 6, I was wise. Even oil coordinator Harold Ickes was wise at 6, and Walter Winchell also. We were all wise at the age of 6. But today, we're more or less insane. There are exceptions, but I don't want to start anything. Not at the moment. I'm busy writing a story called Sadness at 6. I was walking along dead, and suddenly I saw the windows of Centerville gleaming redly, quietly. I heard a dog barking, and the children who were coasting on the hill were making plenty of swell noise. It was February, I shall presume, and the sun was getting redder and redder all over the whole neighborhood. There was a strange old color as of dream, and I was born amid radiant glowings, born into this world to get in line with the boys, the good boys or the bad boys, either which way. And with a sweep of wonderment, I began to live, a man on the earth, his relation to all things, to himself, to his fellow man, to his society, and to the universe. I was born in February 1929, which makes me 13 years old as I write. Not bad for a kid, hey? Yes, I was born, and the music began to filter into my being, and the colors accentuated deeply, and the weird flutings, as of Joyce, could be heard emanating from my lips. And I was a man on the earth at last, aged 2 minutes, 5 seconds. I went home and ate my first meal. That's all I remember, and there's not much else to say. I was born suddenly at the age of 6, and I'm thanking whoever did it for me, be it Bazarov's God or Wolf's or Aquinas's. He was 20 when he wrote this in 1942. And, you know, I think it's a good example of the kind of gems that are in a Top and Underwood that reveal, you know, really how advanced he was, you know, as a late teenager into his early 20s, you know, with his ability to write, but also his astounding, sharp mind, you know, that perceived and gained insights. I don't know if anybody wants to say anything about that or.
Just merci. Thank you. That was beautiful.
Yeah. I just want to mention, you know, because we lost Roger Burnell, you know, from Lowell in about a week or 10 days ago, and I'd be remiss, you know, as a person who worked closely with him and who was friends with him, you know, not to acknowledge him, you know, on a broadcast, you know, with this reach. Roger really was remarkable, you know, as an advocate for Jack Kerouac. He invented the guided tour of Kerouac's Lowell Places. He had, you know, really an astounding and I feel unique perspective on Kerouac as a person and a writer, you know, because of his sort of twin strengths of knowledge of Kerouac's books, but also being from the cultural and linguistic ground that Kerouac, you know, came from. I mean, in some ways, Roger was the last linguistic link, you know, in this community. You know, there were other people who, you know, speak, you know, the French that's spoken in Lowell, but I don't know of another person who knows Kerouac's writing, you know, in depth, you know, who can merge, you know, both that knowledge of language and knowledge of the literature, and we'll miss him, you know. And I don't know if in later years one or more of his tours were videotaped, but it would, you know, it'd be too bad if there's not a record, you know, of you know, Ghosts of Tuckerville Night or the Merrimack, the Mighty Napo. And I mean, it was just amazing and inventive and innovative, you know, what Roger did with his personal research and then his, you know, individual leading and teaching of thousands and thousands of people. If there's time, I'll read the piece of my own that I brought to the
Please.
table here.
Yes, yay.
Okay. I was looking for something that might fit in. I didn't write this with Jack Kerouac in mind, but afterward, or now, reading it in this kind of context, it's interesting to think about, the echoes, of Kerouac's experience and, what's going on in the poem. I wrote it when I was living in Southern California in 1983. And the poem talks about listening to a radio broadcast that was available on the San Diego public radio station every Sunday morning. They had a kind of public affairs block to fill. And so they grabbed this program called Sunday Morning in Canada, the way some of the public radio stations now grab BBC, to fill overnight or so forth. But, of course, me being French Canadian, it had a special resonance. And, as I mentioned, it was a kind of North American melange because, I was, not quite inside of Mexico, but pretty close. And, in the United States, and then, getting these voices from Canada. It's called Sunday Morning in Canada. The odd offering of Canadian news sprayed from a San Diego tower to my radio an hour north by car raised questions about fact and happening. Parliamentary debates affect Yellowknife and Saint-Jean-Mata. Beirut smoke and Olympic medals garnish breakfast plates in Toronto. And here I am in salsa country, eavesdropping on continental bulletins, acting as if it must matter to know as much as I can about anything being done anywhere. I can't stop listening to the planet getting older. Somehow I'll need this as much as the fruit and vegetables at Ralph's Market. Why else would I be able to tap into the line? Still, there's probably a better reason I keep turning north when I'm so far south that people walk here from Mexico. Reports flow back and forth like weather ridges, high pressure systems, like acid rain and waterfall, all in the air. Thanks again for having me. I look forward to hearing from the other people in the Hollywood squares.
Could I ask you a question, Paul? Could you tell us something about, since you were one of the founders of Lowell Celebrates Kerouac, and also the commemorative, which is unique in the world of having an author where there's a whole commemorative with just obelisks with his writings written in stone. If you could tell us something about that for the people that aren't familiar with that.
Sure. In 1988, we dedicated what's called the Jack Kerouac Commemorative. It's a sculptural tribute in granite designed by Ben Waitena. At the time, he was an artist in Texas, and he won a design competition that we ran in Lowell. We were at the time we were doing what would turn out to be $1 million public art collection, led by the late Senator, United States Senator Paul Tsongas from Lowell. And we had done a couple of projects, and I proposed that we should under the umbrella of the public art program do something for Kerouac. There had been talk in the community of doing something probably shortly after he died in 1969. But this was not quite 20 years. And the planning began around 1986, and we unveiled the commemorative in 1988. And it consists of 8 3-sided polished granite red carnelian granite, inscribed with more than 5,000 words of Kerouac. It's a portrait in language. It's really unique among tributes to writers. I mean, what we typically see is a writer's home, like Emily Dickinson's home preserved, I actually had occasion when we were planning to go out to Salinas to the John Steinbeck Library and see that they had a life-size bronze statue of John Steinbeck out front of the library. I was never convinced that that was the way to go. I always believed that if we could figure out how to do it, that as I said, a portrait in language, would be the most appropriate way to, pay tribute, to an author. It was in the general time period of the Vietnam War memorial, and we had seen how powerful that granite sculpture inscribed with 55,000 names was, and how it affected the American psyche. We came around to a consensus, that this should be Kerouac's writing, and that was the task given to the artists who responded to the design competition. And so in 1988, we were able to unveil it with a big event in Lowell. It was on a Saturday. On the Friday night before, we had 1,000 people for a poetry reading with Ginsberg and Ferlinghetti and Creeley and Michael McClure, with Ray Manzarek, and Gregory Corso was there. And it was, Michael McClure later said that it was the most important poetry reading that had occurred in America that year in 1988. And I had a chance to give McClure and Manzarek a personal tour of the Kerouac commemorative before the official dedication, and they were just blown away. I think it was Manzarek who said, this is subversive. You're never going to see, thousands of words, this kind of writing, inscribed in granite. I mean, we're used to seeing the words of presidents and generals, and maybe a religious leader, but it was really something new in the world of literature. And I remember them also saying that within 20 years, I mean, to have something like this created was extraordinary. It didn't take 100 years. So we're proud of it, and it anchors the kind of public statement that Lowell makes, 365 days a year about its relationship to Kerouac, and it represented a I read the piece about Kerouac saying he was born, when he was 6 years old. I mean, you can look at the community decision to honor Kerouac as a kind of coming to consciousness, in a community sense. And I remember I had a reporter from the Wall Street Journal who came to see me because, this had made big news. And she said, "Tell me about the controversy." And I said, well, the real story is consensus, because there were 3 public votes, 2 were unanimous, and 1 had 1 dissenter. I said, so the story here is really a community, coming together around a decision to honor, in some ways a difficult artist. I mean, a contemporary artist writing, sometimes experimental prose, was not, mainstream in any way. And so I said, I think you have to give credit, to the community for reaching this point. But she said, well, my editor, he wants the controversy. And, of course, that's what makes the media go around.
Well, you're a poetic and good communicator, and you've done a lot for your community and are able to collaborate in a way, I think, with a lot of people, because you and perhaps your wife worked with you on improving the waterways and building another park in Lowell.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, most of my professional career, I was involved with the Renaissance of Lowell. Lowell, had really difficult economic times in through the most of the 20th century, and was just starting to come out of it in the middle to late 1970s. And then that's when I was able to get involved and play a role in helping the community to go forward. And now it's as well as recovering economically, the city is also seen as a hub of culture and arts and heritage, and is seen really internationally as a model of a gritty city revitalizing itself. And there's a lot for people to see. And I actually wrote a book about that whole process called Mill Power, that talks about how Lowell was able to come back, and Kerouac was part of the general Renaissance, the sort of the embrace of Jack Kerouac happened alongside the larger recovery.
So Paul, you and Jean-Christophe know each other?
Well, I think we know of each other. We might have met once some years ago, but I don't know him. I've never spent this much time looking at him.
Yeah, I know. No one spends as much time looking at ourselves with all these new technologies, right? But no, we actually never got to meet in person. But we've had a few email exchanges. We had a close call one time, but I couldn't get to Lowell in time. But I'm very glad to be able to at least have this connection right now, Paul. Thank you so much for those wonderful readings, and thank you for all your work, and also for this wonderful book, Atop and Underwood, which is a book that I cherish. So many of the pieces in there.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it has some, I think, really important documents about the French identity of Kerouac that hadn't been seen before, and his take on the language and the culture as part of his identity. So I'm very pleased to see what you were able to do, bringing the French language works to a broader audience, and your commentary and insights about that, I think have been very important.
Well, thank you, Paul. That means so much to me. No, absolutely, you're right on about the Top and Underwood. I mean, one of the great things about all the pieces in there too, in terms of the French identity, is you have pieces where he's got this kind of shame about being seen as a French Canadian, and then on the flip side, you have some of the texts where he couldn't be more proud. He couldn't be more proud to have this kind of heritage. You've got, The Father of My Father, where he talks about French Canadian language being the most powerful language, in the world.
Most languagey language in
most
the world.
languagey language in the world, yeah. And then in Search by Night, he sees these two French Canadian kind of guys get into the restaurant, and he wants to hide out and
yeah, that's really interesting, and I believe it's the first time he puts the sound of the local French into text, and first time he uses it, and you're exactly right. He's not too proud of what he's looking at.
Yeah, but it's also, when you can hear the sound, when he's able to write it in a way that you can hear the way they talk, and it's just so flavorful. delicious for me as someone who understands that language. I love the way he's able to capture it there. And the way he describes food. I mean, one of the things I love about Kerouac in general is the way he describes food. I think there should be like a book of just like Kerouac's food writings.
Yeah.
Because it's always so wonderful. And in that story, he describes eating hamburger. I think he eats like 4 hamburgers in like 16 pages or something.
Oh, yeah, right, right.
But he describes eating a hamburger in a way that I've never seen before. It's amazing, you know.
When I brought Dr. Sachs home, maybe I was 19 or 20 or something. I was still living with my parents, who were like right out of the Kerouac cohort. My father was born in 1919. My mother was born in 1921. My mother was actually in pre-kindergarten with Kerouac. So, she was from the same neighborhood. My father was from the actual Little Canada across the river. But they were, raised, in that subculture that was, so French Canadian American saturated at that point. And when I brought Dr. Sachs home and my father picked it up and started to read it, I mean, he was laughing out loud because it was the first time he had ever seen in print the sounds of the oral language, that was his first language. It really blew his mind. And I could see him sounding out the phrases and the words and so forth. And it was a real revelation for him.
I'm not surprised. I love hearing that. It had the same effect on me. It had the same effect on my parents as well. And I think in an interview, Kerouac mentions to whoever he's speaking to. I can't remember which one, but it's in one of the interviews that it's included in Conversations with Kerouac, the book. And he says, "Do you know how delighted people are in Quebec about the French and Dr. Sachs?" Like he's very aware that people in Quebec are very delighted by the way he was able to put down that passage. It's about his uncle, il a marié l'Indienne, and that whole kind of passage. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It was he was functioning as a like a folklorist, an anthropologist, a sociologist, in a way, in Visions of Gerard and Dr. Sachs, in particular, a little bit in Maggie Cassidy, but particularly in Gerard and Dr. Sachs. And it's there's nothing else like it. Certainly in the regional literature, of the Lowell area.
I agree. Yeah, it's wonderful. It's a wonderful trilogy.
Yeah. And to think that, these books were translated, in 30 languages. So, that was astounding for those of us, who came from, Lowell and Greater Lowell, to know that he had taken, this very familiar, culture of place and people and food and language, and shaped it into world-class art. It really added, to your sense of being part of something, substantial.
Right.
Jean-Christophe, we have Chloe is on with us, and we've prepared a few texts. Chloe Trujillo. Hello, Chloe.
Hi. You didn't
Hi.
see me, or did you see?
Do you know what I was flicking through?
I just weaseled in.
I spied you, so I know you're multitasking.
Yeah.
So Chloe is an artist. She's been with us before. She's an actress and a singer, and is Parisian French, and is going to read for us in French. Jean-Christophe is going to introduce the pieces because he knows exactly what's going on. Jean-Christophe?
Okay, so should we do the Poor Little Canuck, the hybrid with Jim as well?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay.
Did he
thought
step
that's what we're
aside?
doing, right?
I saw him step aside for us. Oh, there. Hello, James.
But I have to step aside to read my text on the computer. But we used.
Okay.
It's
Do you want
okay.
to try that?
I think that'll work. Let me see.
Okay, great. Okay.
Can you hear me now
Jean-Christophe, do you want
still?
to explain our conception, what's going on here?
Yeah, so over the past few days, we've been kind of concocting this trilingual, translingual experiment here. So the source text is from La Nuit est ma femme, The Night is My Woman. So which is his Kerouac's one of his two longest French texts. And we're going to be reading this short section, but we've kind of separated the lines into. I'm going to read it in the original Canuck French. Let's just call it Canuck French that Kerouac wrote it in. Then, and when Jim reads, he's going to read it in English translation form. And when Chloe reads it, she reads it in her own translation into a more Parisian or standard French version of the original. And in terms of the context of what this passage is, it's close to the end of The Night is My Woman. He has just gotten the fuck out of college, as he says in the book, and he is decided to go down south and try his hand at writing for the first time. And he's having a kind of existential crisis after hearing an African-American man on the bus talk to him about what it means to go home. And he's so enchanted by hearing the way the man is speaking that it keeps on ringing in his mind after the way he said going down home, and it kind of goes from there. So that's the context. Should we just dive in?
Yes.
Vous êtes prêts?
On est
Okay.
prêt.
All right, let's go. All right, going down home. Et j'étais seulement un pauvre petit Canuck qui avalit trop de livres.
Ce soir-là, c'était triste dans ma chambre.
I don't think I have the right. Oh, okay. There it is. Outside my window, there was a brick wall and a stick-like little tree.
J'avais pris une walk, puis il n'y avait rien. Seulement des grandes rues avec des mailbox et des trash cans.
I wrote my heart out. J'écrivais tout mon cœur.
I wrote my heart out. It made me cry.
J'avais tout bouleversé ma vie seulement pour écrire ces petites affaires-là. Je les regardais sur le morceau de papier.
Je pensais qu'un bon jour, quelqu'un lira ça et chialera avec moi. Et ça lui ferait du bien. Il comprendrait un petit peu mieux la manière de vivre. Ne faire de mal à personne, comme si tous les hommes étaient des frères, puis aimer les petites choses de la vie avec respect, ne pas cracher sur celle-ci et se trouver une paix personnelle faite de probité et tendresse.
But that's impossible in this here world, and I knew it.
Seulement pour se gagner une croûte de pain pour manger tandis que tu vis. Il faut aller se battre puis se mélanger dans l'aine et la marde des autres et dans des jobs impossiblement sales. Oui, il est venu un jour qu'ils m'ont assigné de cleaner les toilettes 4 ans plus tard. Des travaux idiotiques comme ma pelle de fudge, les guenilles grasses sous d'un éléphant et des complications amortables de paycheck, time clock, tax bill, rent, intérêt, 5 cents pour aller aux toilettes.
Je savais déjà que la plupart du monde était peuplé d'imbéciles, l'Amérique comme le reste.
J'ai voyé tout se cracher dans la face d'un pôle à l'autre.
They called it life. They called it the economy. Worse than everything, they called it necessity. And in the papers, they wrote solemn editorials about it.
Toutes les choses dans ce maudit monde étaient acceptables, sauf des larmes du cœur. Ça se payait pas, ça se vendait pas, ça s'achetait pas.
And they were all I knew. That and the dreams of the beautiful green country, stretching itself from one ocean to another, around the sun and around the stars of the immortal night.
Woo!
Ooh, ça me fait pleurer. The concept of being inside Jack Kerouac's head, where he has the Canuck, he has the real French, and then his English language. Ça me fait du bien. Thank you. That was incredible. Jean-Christophe, can you introduce the pièce on Robert that Chloe's going to do?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
So this is, it's a bilingual poem that was included in Poems All Sizes, published
Oh,
by.
this is great. This is good.
You know that one? Dwight? Isn't that so good? That one? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and may I say hello, Kathy Cassidy? Kathy, we
Hi.
love you. So good to see you. David, Kathy came on to say hello.
Hi. Hi, David.
Kathy, thank you for coming, and so glad that we could end the series with all people who knew Jack and young people like Jean-Christophe who are taking the heritage of him and bringing it to a new generation. And that's the whole idea. Thing of Beauty was a joy forever, and this has just been a joy to see Jack's work honored in this way. And we thank all of you. Merci bien pour tout qui a parlé français. And just to mention, when Jack and I used to speak French, and I had my Sephardic Jewish Philadelphia, Feasterville, Pennsylvania accent, and Jack spoke in Lowell French, the literary snobbish types that couldn't stand anybody, including people who spoke English, unless they imitated Lord Beaverbrook, were horrified by seeing these two funky people at 3 a.m. in the morning rapping away in French. And Jack tried to explain graciously that this was his heritage. He loved the language. He knew Victor Hugo or Racine and could speak that way, but he spoke in a different way. And perhaps the people who were so snobbish, if they really felt enamored of that snobism, should learn to speak English better. And Jack was all about that. The other thing, if I may mention, is that his extraordinary use of the English language was because he spoke French until he was 6 years old and had a reverence for English and a reverence for the beauty of America and a reverence for other things that are here that are such a blessing that most of us are brought up to think is either ordinary or invisible. And he opened up everyone's eyes to the beauty that surrounds us.
Yes. Are we ready for Robert?
Yeah, so in it's bilingual poems also. So it's the pain thing is by Lawrence Ferlinghetti. I just want to also, we lost him recently, so, and he published this in the City Lights publishers bookstore, right? The press. So in English, it's called On Waking from a Dream of Robert Fournier. And so he titles, he says on the French side, long poem in Canuckian, child patois, probably medieval. And then in English, he says, and this is an English blues. It just calls it that.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
When I saw that, I'm like, that's great.
We're only doing a section. Just so you know, only doing a section.
Okay.
So who reads what? Chloe, you're going to read from it? Go ahead.
I think so, but
yes.
Pamela, tell me what you want me to read. I printed it all.
Yes, what's there? Is it French and English?
Yes, I have one. Well, it's French. It's like Canuckian child patois, probably medieval, which I agree to it because when I read it. And then the English version, the English blues side.
Okay, so maybe if you do it in French with just a little bit of English sprinkled in, That's
there is some
German
words. There are
sprinkled.
some words in English in the mix.
Okay.
Here and there throughout the whole few pages. Yeah.
Comme tu veux.
So do I? So I start and I read
it's
it.
Only you. So however you want to.
I'm not gonna have the Canuckian like Canadian accent. I'm just gonna do it my French way. If that's
because
okay.
Jack always wanted to be French, and when he went to Paris, he wanted everyone to perceive him that way. So let you be the voice inside his head.
All right. Robert, ta belle grosse mère, enterrée dans le beurre. Là je me rappelle. Robert, t'es petit, mais tu vas être encore plus gros que tu l'es déjà. Avec tout un rêve qui arrêtera avant qu'on le finisse, quand on laisse la divinité le finir. Robert, où est ton arbre? Qu'est-ce qu'on fait avec tes indes spéciales? As-tu tombé dans un trou de tristesse avec moi, dans la nuit commune et sale et pire que mal? Robert, où est ton beau-frère? Tes titres redressent, la page, rien dresse, malheur cesse, où est ton nom? Où sont les neiges, les étoiles éloignées, les rêves? Il y a des faces dans l'arbre qu'ils nous moquent pas. Robert, tes fleurs, tes femmes, tes folles, tes friandises de bine en cuisine. Es-tu mort, ton grand-père, enterré dans la mer? Dread drizzle mere, Robert, dread drizzle mère. Je vis les armes de face, vegetable, comme des picottes dans la noirceur Dieu. Attends les tifous chanter leur musique idiotique et tendre, et charmant comme comédien de Vienne. Chante dans sa cabane. Attends, les rats mangent sa grange, tandis qu'il chante. Robert, Robert, les rats mangent son cœur. Son nom y est Alain, Alain né Fournier. La chanson de Dieu m'a rentré les oreilles à soir. Mon cœur, Robert, je veux t'expliquer. Fapute face souffrante dans les barres brunes. Laisse plus les chiens te mordre, offre-leur plus ta patte. De pauvres brumes, viens avec moi au ciel pur, écoute. Je voue de coupures de chair dans mon aise, mais c'est tout perdu dans la même luisante au sang de l'amour de Dieu. L'amour de Dios, love of God. J'ai ta mère par les mains, Marie-Louise, je la sors, je l'ai dans mon église. J'y allume, oops, sorry. My printer had some problems, so, okay. J'y allume les fleurs, je la fais travailler pour le bon Seigneur. Et pas peur, Robert, âme tendre et tranquille. Ah, c'est un rêve pour causer les choses bâties, quoi d'autre? Viens avec moi, Robert, asseoir, braille plus. Rentre avec moi dans les Indes, finis le rêve. Instruis ta mère, ton père, ton pauvre grand frère, tes vieux frères du matin. Sors, monte, ascends, va en tour, où tu peux. Sur la terre, comme tu peux, tu pues, pis c'est fini, rêve, invinglé, et morfouillé fou, qu'embrassé, impossiblement vif et soignant et toignant. Margue pour les chailles, moronique du diable, la vie n'est pas. Robert, Robert, je t'eus perdu dans la mer omnis pour toujours déjà, hélas. Les vignes montrent les poteaux, les hommes souffrent, les bouts chantent tranquillement entre tous. La tristesse et la mort et l'amour false de jambes et larmes. Sors, rentre, monte, cours, dors. Écoute, Robert, la prière du Seigneur pour tu. Ô Robert, qui a la clé du pouvoir, lève ta main, diamante, rentre les choses idiotiques, debout. Détruis, extermine, ô Robert, donneur du courage, donne du courage, tous, qu'ils sont en extrémité de souffrance. Ô Robert qui purifie, purifie tous qu'ils sont esclaves de l'ego, que Victor de la souffrance gagne encore et encore. Ô Robert, parfaitement en connaissance de la lumière sainte, amène tous les pauvres vivants de l'existence en ta connaissance. Ô Robert, parfait en sagesse et amour, tendre sort toutes les pauvres vivants de leur prison d'existence et amène à les Indes sacrées. Om, Amen. Adoration à la Tathagata. Le connaisseur de... And I am missing a page.
Par terre.
Le connaisseur de... Je ne sais pas.
Well, that's brilliant up to there. And when you
Essence
think of,
universelle.
yeah, when you think of Jack Kerouac, you know, and that's really what's going on, you have to realize the level of intelligence to be in two languages that way.
It's really impressive to like just reading it. It's even more powerful. Like I was reading it in my head earlier, just for the first time, and reading it aloud. Like I discovered so many little, I don't know, like little intricacy of like even some words have double meanings, whether they're spoken in French or like the English translation is so like symbolic almost. Very, very cool.
Well, I could feel you get carried away also.
Yeah,
like the language
and I lost my
transporting you.
page. And
Jack used to be able to recite Victor Hugo and Racine and all those people by memory in perfect, what you would call high French, which doesn't mean
Yes.
getting high. It means école de Lyon, que les gens
Mhm.
parfaitement le français. And les gens de la façon canadienne ont fait les choses. The Canadian style is different, but he made us all realize that however you speak and however other people speak is all correct, because that way of speaking reflects a whole cultural history and of what a people have gone through to speak that way and be that way. That's very often not recorded, except in the fact that they speak a similar language differently. So he was able to take the beauties of American eclectic speech, which a lot of other authors did, just as great composers like Dvorak said, if you can appreciate African American or Native American music, and Dvorak put it in his letters, not me, that composers would have a palette to draw upon, and painters in the Hudson Valley School, who were considered to be old hat because they were painting what happened in the Hudson Valley, are now appreciating, just as some of the abstract expressionist painters were who came along when we were together, because they were doing what they found and they felt in everyday life. Rauschenberg would take a piece of junk from the street and make a great work of art about it, not because he was a junk man or didn't care or was an avant-garde freak-out artist, but because he saw simple objects and simple ways of speaking and simple imagery can be beautiful, and you can use the classical tradition, the formal, to take the improvisatory or the informal or the spontaneous and combine them and make something beautiful out of it. And that's been going on for a long time. And in a merchandising society, there's no place for that because people don't understand how precious and valuable that is, and that everybody can do it, and that it's free because it's already there if you pay attention.
Yes. Well, Chloe, thank you for helping us be an example of that. I think Chloe's multitasking. So
Yeah, I have my children, like my kids here. So yes, it's
thank you.
but thank you for having me again, and what a pleasure, and thank you for it was nice to read with Jean-Christophe and James, and it was like, thank you so much again for having me, and nice to see everybody. I've seen some faces that I saw last time I was on, and of course David, thank you, and Pamela, and I will see you hopefully soon in real, maybe one day.
We appreciate you and the
Merci,
beauty
Chloe.
that you are showing, and being able to have us hear the French language spoken so beautifully by an artist of your caliber. Thank you so much. Merci bien.
Thank you. That's an honor. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Love you, Chloe.
Merci.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And your family.
Do you think we should have some people, since this is our last, some of the Zoom regulars who've been on, who have listened to us, and we're going to get on so they could speak. Some of them have never even been on. You might have a question you want to ask Jean-Christophe or Paul Marion or Jim Canary or Monsieur Jean-Christophe. And if there's anybody on Zoom that wants to ask a question, this would be a good time to ask that question. And one of those four people could give you a fantastic answer.
I don't have a Murray Weinstock here. I don't have a.
Yay! Thank you for being here so often.
I do not have a question, but I just appreciate so much keeping this language of Jack Kerouac alive, and reminding me of the spirit that I got in my sophomore year of high school when I discovered On the Road. And I carried it around with me the whole year. And I just, bringing that living poetry and esprit de spirit back really feels fantastic. And the connection with everybody's work, David and all of you, just made me feel really young again and spirited. So I really want to thank everybody involved in this project, because it was just a joy to jump in, fly in on these Zoom sessions. So thanks.
Thank you. How lovely you are. And you've made us all feel cooler on other levels. And it's always nice having you with us. I'm gonna miss the
Terry, thank you
Sundays,
for all the
missing you.
Thank you for all the music you composed, played, produced, and recorded for the last 40 years. Make this country more mellow and enjoyable for everybody.
Thanks for saying that, David.
Can I ask a question? Are these Zoom sessions, are they archived or
They are.
recorded?
They're under
Okay.
ACLAC Creatives.
Okay.
And if you email someone that's up on the show right now, you have any of our emails?
I have yours.
I don't know who's talking right now because
It's Paul.
Paul, I'm sorry, dear.
Yeah.
I don't want to crash my whole setup down like last week. So yes, Paul, I can send you the link to all of the shows.
Right, because I can help get the news around that these are accessible for people who maybe haven't been able to come to the live sessions. I think it will be an amazing resource for people to draw on going forward. So I'll be in touch with you to get the details, and we'll make sure people find out about it.
Okay, and I want to say we're starting to put the playbills onto the YouTubes. So we only completed 2 of those, and so like that will happen within the next few weeks.
Yeah.
It'll be a little nicer to send around that way.
I understand that the programs themselves will be up on YouTube.
Yes, they're all available.
Okay,
you can
good.
get them for free, which is the idea.
Thank you, Paul.
Sure.
So Jim Canary is going to read a Kerouac piece about cookies. Jean-Christophe, can you intro it for us?
Sure. Is this the one from Night is My Woman?
It's what, yes.
Okay, so in this piece, Night is My Woman is structured in a way where he takes you through the all of the menial labors that he's had, all of the dirty labors of the world on this earth of sorrow, as he says in Visions of Cody. And in this one, he has a job in a mill in Lowell, and he has to work in a cookie factory, and it's a lot harder than he thought it was going to be.
Pamela, that's kind of long. Am I really to read all of this, or just a portion?
It's a mood, and this is our dedication to Lowell and to Paul Marion being here, and just Kerouac and Lowell. Mm-hmm.
All right, I'll start then and see how we go. It's called Travail in the Mist. A friend told me there was work in a cookie factory. I decided to try it. It paid over $20. He picked me up one fine morning at 6:15 a.m. I waited for him 5 minutes in the mist, sitting on the porch of my tenement with closed eyes. The sun hadn't yet climbed up the hill on the other side of the river. The big mills sounded everywhere. On the other side of the street, I saw a man come out with his lunch pail. He sped out and then hurried to climb the hill to go to work. Every single morning, I told myself. The guy showed up and we went to the mill. They put a paper hat on my head. They gave me a shovel. They threw a big cart full of fudge at me and they said, throw that on the belt with your shovel and level it with your hands. It rolls around the rollers over there. It gets flat. Automatic blades cut out little circles. It rolls into the oven, comes out cooked the other side. And the girls over there put it in the box. Understand? Yes. You can't stop. If you stop 1 minute, the whole factory stops. Understand? Sure. I thought myself strong. I had a whole factory depending on my hands. I started. It was 7 a.m. For half hour, I whacked into that thing with all my strength. I'd make big squares of fudge with the shovel and took them out with my hands. After that, I'd tear them in two and in fours. I'd break them up with my fingertips, then I'd stamp them level all around. I'm gonna have to switch screens here in a minute. Let's see what we got. At 8, I started to think it was probably 9 o'clock. Not only wasn't it 8 o'clock, it was 10 to 8. At 5 to 8, I started to sweat. I bent down to take out a chunk and my sweat fell into the thing. I just didn't have the time to wipe myself. The boss, hang on here, said that I was going too slow. After 9 o'clock, I didn't even try to wipe my forehead. My eyes were too wet to see anything farther than 5 feet. I only saw my work and my work wasn't clear. Well, I was stuck in a mill. I cursed and I cursed like I've never cursed in my life. I was surprised to see how well I was able to curse. I invented some. I laughed, I cried. No one heard me among the thunder. It was hotter than being out in the July sun. The sweet odor made me sick. I was pretty angry at the other guys in there, only because they worked here for years and years that I was sure that each one was crazier than the next. Yet every time a guy passed by and said, "How's it going?" I'd always laugh and say, "Okay." It wasn't them. It was the people who owned the mill and made it run so fast like this, and the women who were too lazy to make the other cookie. That's what I think, and that's what it is. I promised myself to never let myself be eaten up like this again. I started to feel pain in my arm in a manner queer and weak. I stopped for 10 minutes at 10 o'clock with all the others to sit in the lockers. My right arm began to stretch on its own. I couldn't bring it down. I had to massage it as fast as possible before a knot could form. I had no strength left. All of a sudden, I thought of the women who make cookies in their little kitchen, and I loved them. I thought of their pretty cheeks and their checkered dresses, their little plates, and how in the afternoon the children came from school to try some. I wanted to leave. My friend told me I'd get used to it. I looked at him and made a face. "How long you been here?" "Me? 3 years November. Why?" "What'd you do before that?" "I worked in the mills. What'd you think?" I returned to my shovel, my fudge that had changed to vanilla, and I started up again. I no longer cursed. I no longer laughed. I no longer cried. I only waited until noon, and I went home. It took all day to get to noon, all day, and a whole little life in hell. I came out with my hair and my eyes covered in flour, melted in my sweat, my pants, my boots, my hands covered with sugar filth. Me in the white shirt, brown like cow shit in the front. I walked home like that. I looked at people in the street with surprise that there were things like this in life and that nobody cared at all. Is there another page?
There's another version of that cracker cookie factory experience in the Top and Underwood. It's a piece called "The Birth of a Socialist,"
Oh,
and he rehearses the same experience that he describes in that piece, and in the end, he doesn't go back the next day and goes swimming and reads poetry along the brook.
And
Right,
he also gives it to Slim Jackson in Pick, Pick's older brother. In Pick, he gives him that experience of working in a cookie fudge factory as well. So he works it in a couple of places.
Yeah, that was the Educator Cracks, the actual cookie factory it's in downtown Lowell. And when all the ovens were on full blast, the whole downtown smelled like a bakery.
I can imagine.
well, as a mill town, I felt that cookie poem. I say it's prose, but it really touched me. And you had written a book on Milltown, and was Jack Kerouac's mother had been in mills, and it's such a part of that town. And
Yeah.
it's incredible how the town is still a lot of brick and I want to say old world and preserved itself.
Yeah, well, in some ways, the economic decline worked to Lowell's benefit because the much of the 19th century red brick architecture and even commercial buildings remained in place, just because economic redevelopment didn't show up, and when it came time for the city to sort of stand itself up again, the historic preservation was a value in the air, and it meant that the buildings that had been passed over now had a kind of added value, and as a result were preserved. So I mean, if you go to Lowell, it's essentially the same Lowell that Kerouac grew up in the 20s, 30s. He was there till the early 40s. And I mean, you can use the Lowell novels as guidebooks to get yourself around the city. I mean, anybody, Jim, Jean-Christophe, anybody who's been there knows that. So it's quite interesting, that the whole city is a kind of monument to Kerouac's literature as an American place.
And David, you've been to Lowell so many times. What are some of your favorite experiences?
Me?
Yes.
I think the very first time I went, they had someone who was working for the Parks Department who was helped to be in charge of it. He had on one of those hats like the Rangers wear, and he said to the audience, he said, "David, we want you to know Lowell is a blue collar experience." And I said, "Life is a blue collar experience." And the wonderful thing about Lowell was someone said to me, "How would you describe Lowell Celebrates Kerouac? You go there for car fare every year since 1994. How do you explain that?" I said, "Well, there's a place called Cappy's Copper Kettle. And on Thursday night, they have the official opening. And at the official opening, everybody is just hanging out. The late Alan Crane would get up and give a rousing hour and 10-minute performance with George Gonzalez playing his homemade drums. And then when it was my turn, Meg Smith, who was a Spanish English translator, a journalist, also a very accomplished belly dancer, would do a Turkish sword dance. And while she was doing this sword dance with the sword on her head, in back of me was a great picture of Mickey Ward, champion boxer, in his boxing outfit. And in the other room was the football game at the bar, usually with either the football game or the usually it was too late for the World Series being played at the same time. So you had Mickey Ward, an Egyptian belly dancer, and the football or baseball game all at the same time. And somehow it all fit together. And that was the opening night of Lowell Celebrates Kerouac. They didn't have any big speakers. They didn't have any of that stuff. It was just real down home for real, and exactly what it was like when you went to Gunther's Bar in Northport, where Jack lived and hung out, and all the places like the Cedar Tavern that we went to, and all the places across America where so much great music, great conversation, and great life took place. And as Sir James Galway told me, he said, "David, where I come from in Ireland, we don't endorse putting on airs." And that's the wonderful thing about Lowell. It's so for real. And the other thing that makes the festival so extraordinary is the Jack Kerouac Poetry Contest, which rather than going to the Nuremberg trials or a public execution, it's a bunch of kids whose folks mostly came from countries where they didn't speak English, who didn't speak English at home. And like Jack, these youngsters learned to speak English here in this amazing country of ours, and not only spoke it, were writing poetry, reading poetry, and cheering each other on. And it was just such a beautiful, healthy, glorious thing to see. And to think that this was honoring the high school that Jack Kerouac went to, and Jack himself and his egalitarian spirit was very, very moving. And I think it's a boon to all those people who want to be writers, poets, painters, musicians, truck drivers, astronauts, astrophysicians, or anything, to find a place where you can go, where you can feel welcome, you can see that people appreciate one another, and increasingly they're proud of someone who is their native son. That's a heck of a thing. And my hope is every country, every town in our country will honor people of distinction of where they came from and be proud of who they were. And that this Lowell can set an example that it's possible to do that, that someone with a typewriter can sit for 3 weeks and change the world forever in a beautiful way, and that you don't have to have a battery of people surrounding you telling you to be something that you're not in order to have worthiness, that you can just do anything that's in your heart and do it well. And if you devote your life to it, maybe something good will happen and you'll make a contribution. And I think Lowell Celebrates Kerouac restores that, and they don't have any blowhards, including me, laying out that big heavy philosophy. It's just the way it is. It's so for real that some people come and they're looking for, where's the meat? Where's the big shots? Where's the action? Where's the guru new age enlightenment? Well, it's just for real. It transcends all of that crap that surrounds our society and reminds us how beautiful the simple values of life are, and what an amazing country this is. And the fact that we can welcome and be proud of the fact that a city like this invites people from other places to come here and have a better life, and remind us how the heck we got here. And also reminds me what I always talk about Frank McCourt when we were speaking to Kathy Cassidy recently, on the show, that he said, I was after you came back from the Cork Festival, you told me how they admired you because you knew myself and my brother Malachi. He said, well, they didn't admire us that much when we were growing up with no money and going back and forth from Brooklyn to Ireland with nothing. When I wrote a best-selling hit book, I got called up by a city official who said, Frank, we'd like to build a statue of you. I said, well, gee, what an honor. He said, not really. I told him, no way. I said, why is that, Frank? And he said, because I can't bear statues. And I said, why is that? And he said, because I hate pigeons. That to me sums up the beauty of Lowell, and just the beauty of being able to celebrate an old friend who was such an inspiration to me and millions of other people, a wonderful guy, and someone whose work we're beginning to appreciate. And his work makes us appreciate ourselves and other people and other people's work. That's a heck of a thing. That's why I wrote the book Offbeat, collaborating with Kerouac, to try to show that spirit that he had that lives on after he left us.
Yes,
Thank
and
all
I
of you
think
for
I
coming.
feel when we all go to heaven that we've carried the spirit in the way that a soul might greatly appreciate. And I thank you all for that. You've been like, quote, beats with us in the regard that we've been mutually referential. We've been focusing on the same purpose, and translated whole eras with David. And I thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I finally got my microphone fixed for the last program, thanks to my son Adam, who has more tech. So I'm going to move it over to the piano and just play a farewell song, and thank all of you. Thank you, Pamela. Thank you, Anthony Demarbiex. Thank you, Paul Marion and Jim Canary and Monsieur Jean-Christophe and Zoe and all the other people, Chloe, all the other
Norton, Chloe,
great people,
Hassan,
all who've come on, Brenda Vaccaro
Joyce.
and Keel DeLay, and all the wonderful people who've been on this program. And hope this will make you creative.
Kelly.
And for all the people who are watching, hope you'll do something in your life and make your own show that can encourage other people to express their creativity. If I can just get to work this microphone, which my son's asleep, so I'm gonna have to do it myself.
That was who was the hands earlier.
It's let me see. There must be
Bye,
something.
Dorothea.
There we are.
Bye,
Okay,
darling.
that's good enough. Hang on just a second, folks.
Oh.
Reality.
Here's my coffee cup.
Everybody's taking credit because we're trying to do who can be the quietest, but someone didn't win.
Yeah, that was a mighty octave.
Some mighty ducks. Thank you, Kathy. Kathy Cassidy, we appreciate you so much. Her presentation was extraordinary. Desolation Peak. Hello, Cynthia. Hello, NLC Woodwinds. Nice to see you today. I think David's playing and doesn't realize we can't hear him. He must have plugged it into something. I was just waiting for him to play. He's done a whole symphony already. David.
David, you playing?
Maybe that noise blew the speaker.
We're one take wonders with this show.
I think something blew the microphone. I think
David,
it was
Muted.
David, do you plugged in the mic or something? Because we can't hear anything.
Can't hear you.
Now.
Now.
Yeah,
Now
we
we
hear
hear
you now.
you.
there.
Judith, thank you so much. Thank you for sending your art as well.
Simply say just a big merci bien, a thank you, and sing it since the microphone doesn't work and the piano doesn't either. Yes, say simply, and you can be your own rhythm section. Thank you all so much for being here. It's been a joy to be with you since the program began last September, don't you know? We want to thank Pamela and Anthony and all the people who arrived tonight for this very, very, very special Kerouac show. It's been 6 months and we're done now, but we know that you all remain creative somehow. And until the time when we get together again, we want to say amen and hope that you feel each and every day that you could be creative too. And that's fortunately all the hot air I've got left for all of you.
A bientôt.
All of us to do each and every day.
A bientôt.
Be creative and love thy neighbor as thyself, and you could say it in any language you want. Put the translation on someone else's shelf. You don't really need to worry about it at all, because all you got to do is answer nature's call. And until we get together again, we're going to say merci bien pour tous and amen. So with
A bientôt.
for all of humankind.
A bientôt.
A bientôt.
Good. And we hope that we someday can be just like some amazing ship like Pete Seeger's made out of teak wood. And until then, we want to say goodbye. And until then, we want to say, I thank you so much for your being here.
A bientôt.
Shitty-a-doo-boo. And when
A
you
bientôt.
bring someone else some cheers, shilly-a-doo play. And until then, Nirvana is near. That's all I've got to say. A bientôt.
Good night. Thank you,
Good
everybody.
night.